These are the 7 war films Tarantino actually respects. Forgotten titles, studio flops, and one movie so uncomfortable nobody saw it. When Tarantino got asked about his all-time favorite war film, he didn't go with the obvious picks. He didn't name Platoon or Saving Private Ryan or The Thin Red Line. He went with Casualties of War, directed by Brian De Palma. And that says a lot. The story itself comes from a real incident, the Hill 192 case during the Vietnam War. It's based on a 1969 New Yorker article by Daniel Lang, which got released as a book just a month later. It's brutal stuff. A squad of American soldiers kidnaps, assaults, and murders a young Vietnamese woman. It's not a feel-good story. Not even close. De Palma had been trying to make this film since 1969. But with the war still going on, there wasn't a studio in Hollywood that would touch it. Even after the war ended, it took another 15 years, and the success of Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, and De Palma's own Untouchables, before Paramount gave him the green light. And it still flopped. $22 million budget, just over $18 million at the box office. The subject matter was just too much for a mainstream crowd, too real. Spielberg watched it in a private screening and told the execs at Columbia, "You'll be thinking about this for a week." And he was right. It's not something you forget. The screenwriter, David Rabe, disassociated himself from the film, saying that De Palma had not been faithful to his script, but Tarantino has always stood by it. He's called it the greatest film about the Vietnam War, and honestly, it's hard to argue with that. 10 years before Billy Wilder made Stalag 17, he directed Five Graves to Cairo, a World War II thriller set in the deserts of North Africa. It's about a British soldier who survives a battle and ends up pretending to be a waiter at a hotel, one that just so happens to get taken over as Rommel's new headquarters. The whole setup is fictional, but the context around it was fresh and topical. The Battle of El Alamein had just happened, and the film even uses real footage from it in the closing scenes. Wilder brought in British Army Major David P.J. Lloyd as a consultant because the guy had direct experience with tank warfare in Libya. They didn't have big battles on screen, but they still made over 1,200 uniforms for the production. Wilder wasn't messing around. The film earned 3 Oscar nominations, same as Stalag 17, and despite not being a giant blockbuster, it still holds up as one of the sharpest war thrillers of the era. Tarantino loved that Wilder and co-writer Charles Brackett didn't feel the need to stick to history. They just made their own version of Rommel. Not accurate, not trying to be, but totally riveting. One of Tarantino's favorite war stories, hands down. Now this one's a deep cut. Tonight We Raid Calais, directed by John Bram. Tarantino discovered it while researching Inglourious Bastards, and he's been championing it ever since. It follows a British intelligence officer played by John Sutton who parachutes into German-occupied France to mark a munitions plant for Allied bombers. He hides out with a local French farming family, including a daughter played by a young Lee J. Cobb, who resents the British for letting France fall. The script came from Waldo Salt, who later won Oscars for Midnight Cowboy and Coming Home. But even back in 1943, you could see Salt's fingerprints. Tarantino said the storytelling here feels modern, ahead of its time. There's a fascinating theory that this movie may have been part of the Allied deception campaign leading up to D-Day, meant to make the Germans think the invasion would happen at Pas-de-Calais. Whether that's true or not, it gives the film this extra layer of intrigue. It came out a full year before D-Day, and it's all about Calais. You can connect the dots. Tarantino called Salt the father of modern screenwriting, and you can see why. The movie's lean, tightly written, and way more dynamic than you'd expect from a 1943 wartime drama. No wonder it stuck with him. This one flies under the radar, but it's an absolute gem. Action in Arabia was made during World War II by Russian director Leonid Mogi, one of the few Eastern European directors working in Hollywood at the time. George Sanders plays a journalist who gets pulled into a spy plot in the Middle East, right as the Allies and Nazis are both trying to win over Arab support. It's part spy thriller, part propaganda piece, and yeah, it's RKO's attempt to make their own Casablanca. They didn't do half bad. It's got unusually high production values for an RKO picture, mostly because the studio had just scored a massive box office hit with Hitler's Children the year before. They were flush with cash, so halfway through filming, they actually doubled the budget. You're not getting massive battles or tanks rolling through the desert, but what you do get is a tight little thriller with real atmosphere. There's action, intrigue, great pacing, and George Sanders looking sharp as ever. Tarantino absolutely loves this movie. He said outright, it's not the tanks or the large-scale combat that draws him in, it's the storytelling, the character-driven stuff, and Action in Arabia delivers on that front. The Great Escape isn't just one of the most iconic World War II movies, it's one of the most entertaining movies ever made, period. Tarantino said it's probably his favorite war film, and you can see how it fed directly into the DNA of Inglourious Basterds. Directed by John Sturges in 1963, the film is based on the true story of Allied prisoners of war planning a massive breakout from a German prison camp. But instead of being grim or overly serious, it leans hard into charisma and momentum. You've got Steve McQueen, James Garner, Richard Attenborough, Charles Bronson, James Coburn. This is an all-star cast just firing on all cylinders. Now sure, it's been Hollywoodized, no doubt about that, but there's still a solid historical foundation here. The real Tunnel King, Wally Floody, worked as a consultant on the film for over a year, and several of the actors weren't just playing prisoners of war, they were actual prisoners during the war. Donald Pleasance was captured and held at Stalag Luft 1. Hannes Messimer spent time in a Russian camp. Pleasance even said the set design was scarily accurate. He'd lived it, and the attention to detail brought it all right back. If you're talking about war movies that shaped everything that came after, you start with The Dirty Dozen. This is Robert Aldrich's 1967 classic, and it's the blueprint for the entire men on a mission subgenre. Without this film, Inglourious Basterds doesn't exist. Tarantino said as much himself. He sat down thinking he was going to write his own Dirty Dozen. It ended up going in a different direction, but that was the spark that got him to start. It's got one of the most stacked casts of all time. Lee Marvin, Ernest Borgnine, Charles Bronson, Jim Brown, John Cassavetes, Donald Sutherland. Tarantino said it deserves a spot on his list for the cast alone, but it's more than that. Dirty Dozen isn't just action-packed, it's got the grit and grime of a real wartime mess, where the heroes are criminals, the mission is borderline suicidal, and the whole thing feels dangerous in a way war films weren't showing at the time. The inspiration came from a real-life demolition team called the Filthy 13. Their leader, Jake McNeice, was one-quarter Choctaw, which almost certainly influenced Tarantino's take on Aldo Raine. That kind of homage is what makes Bastards feel so baked in, like something Tarantino had been mentally writing for years. And he said the Bastards script took over a decade to nail down because he got too precious about the page. He viewed it as his masterpiece, his big bunch of guys on a mission film in the spirit of The Dirty Dozen and Where Eagles Dare. Tarantino said multiple times that Nolan's Dunkirk completely blew him away. The first time he saw it, it was the sheer scale of it, the spectacle, the sound, the tension. A few years later, he watched it again, then a third time. And by the time he was putting together his list of favorite films of the 2010s, Dunkirk had climbed all the way to number 2. The only thing that beat it was The Social Network. Tarantino talked about it on the Rewatchables podcast, saying he'd been revisiting a bunch of movies from the decade and ranking them. At first, Dunkirk was just in his preliminary 7, but after that rewatch, it jumped straight to the top tier. What really stuck with him were the shots, not just the storytelling or the visuals, but those moments where you can see a director flexing as a pure visual artist. He even compared it to Saving Private Ryan. And as much as he respects that film, especially the opening D-Day sequence, he said the rest of Private Ryan just settles into storytelling after that. With Dunkirk, it never lets up. The artistry doesn't stop once the big sequence is done. It keeps delivering all the way through. Tarantino also admitted something interesting about the experience. He said the scale of it was so overwhelming, he wasn't even sure what he was feeling while watching. He said, "I really liked the movie, but the spectacle almost numbed me to the experience. I don't know if I felt anything emotionally because of the spectacle. I was just kind of awed by it. But I don't even know what I was awed by, to tell you the truth.